Joining me now, Texas Dynamo and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She's a member of the Judiciary and Oversight and Government Reform Committees. Good to have you back on the show, Congresswoman. So at Trump's direction, AG Bondi requested the release of the grand jury testimony. Why not the entire trove of Epstein documents? Because Judiciary Committee Democrats want a hearing with Bondi on the Epstein case. And by the way, you're a lawyer. What would you ask her?
There's a lot that I would ask Pam Bondi, but I do want to go back to the first part about the president now seemingly flipping his position. I do want the American people to recognize that this is nothing more than a game by the con man, again, because he knows, like most others, I'm sure his attorneys have informed him, that the release of grand jury documentation, as it's already been laid out, this is a secret process. It is a lot more difficult to actually get that released. So he gets to play both sides of it. He gets to then blame the courts if the courts then ultimately do what courts are supposed to do, which is to kind of follow the law. So he wants to say, listen, I tried, but it's the judges that wouldn't let me, and then kind of distract. So I don't believe that he actually has any intention whatsoever of being transparent and actually providing those documents, because he could instruct them to release information that was not necessarily a part of the grand jury process, but he did not do that. So I think that that's the real game here, is it allows him to absolve himself of trying to help out, when I know that the real shtick here is that he knows, or he's at least been informed, that that actually may be a really high bar to meet, and that's what he wanted to do.
What are your Republican colleagues telling you, whether it's OTR or even just flat out discussing this? And do you think there will be a vote next week whether or not to require these grand jury documents to be released?
I absolutely think that they are going to run away with this as quickly as possible. We saw a number of Republicans that just skipped a previous vote this week. So I don't anticipate that we will get to any resolution on this. I think that they want to, again, straddle the fence. They want to show that they are loyal to this, I don't even know what to call him. I've called him so many things, but this wannabe Hitler for sure. They want to pledge their loyalty to him, and they know that he does not want this released. I think that they also are concerned about the damage that it may do. If he's trying to hide it, they understand that it is most likely problematic for him, as well as the MAGA brand, as well as the Republicans. So I don't anticipate that they will be on board for doing anything that may harm them or their fearless leader.
Let's move to Trump supporting Texas Governor Greg Abbott redrawing the state's districting map years ahead of schedule to help Republicans keep their congressional majority. So the legislature is going to hold a special session to find 5 new winnable red seats, which likely moves Republican voters out of safely red districts into blue ones. Is this going to further marginalize Democrats in Texas? And what can Democratic lawmakers do about it?
Yeah, so obviously, Alex, you and I met when the Republican legislature in the state of Texas decided that they wanted to violate the law and infringe upon the rights of Texans in our state. That was when I was in the state house, and we broke quorum at that point in time. It was a pretty dramatic thing to do, but we felt like it was necessary because they were pushing these draconian voting laws, because they knew that they had an opening with the evisceration of a lot of our protections under the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby v. Holder case. They are doing the same thing. We know that they gerrymandered in this last legislative session when we actually did go through the maps. In fact, I've been engaged in litigation ever since those new maps were drawn, because we know that they diluted the voices of people of color. And that's basically what they're going to do. They're going to do it again. Texas is a majority minority state, and they don't feel comfortable having to go and present their very much racist policies, the policies that people like the Proud Boys are excited about, the people like the Oath Keepers, people like, we saw on January 6th, those guys. So that's what they're going to do. They are going to minimize people of color's voices, and they truly believe that by pushing their white supremacy agenda, they will be able to then secure more Republican seats. I've got news for them. I believe in the people of Texas, and I believe that this may backfire in a really unprecedented way. In fact, I will tell you confidently that there are absolutely Republicans that currently are serving that are concerned as well, and they should be concerned that this may backfire on them as they try to create these seats, because there will be new vulnerabilities. And I promise you, I am going to do everything that I can to make sure that Texans know what is at stake and understand that they are trying to basically put their voices on mute, and it is time to raise the volume on their voices. And so we will work and outwork this gerrymander to make sure that Texas actually shows up and shows out, and Donald Trump is left being the crybaby that he is.
You're going to bring the bullhorn of that, I'm convinced, on that one. But let me ask you about Governor Gavin Newsom. He said he's going to consider doing something similar in California if Texas goes ahead with redistricting plans. So, I mean, look, if Republicans are doing it, should Democrats redraw districts to their favor too? And if not, why not?
No, I'm all in, Alex. Listen, you know, we are in a crisis in this country, and I've got to tell you that Democrats have consistently held the moral high ground for good reason, regardless of the fact that one party wants to pretend that they are Christians or super Christians. The reality is that don't tell me what you are, show me what you are in your policies and what you do. And I can tell you that Democrats have consistently fought for equity in all ways, even in representation. And so that's why we do have so many states that have decided that they would have these redistricting commissions that are nonpartisan, and they try to be fair. But the reality is that we aren't playing with people that believe in abiding by the rules or the law or the Constitution. We've got people that are going into the mud, and it is time for us to fight back on their same level. And ultimately, when we can earn the trust and we can earn the support and we can actually have a say-so at the ballot box, then we will get this country back on track. But as of right now, we can't afford to lose anything else. And so if that means that we've got to play by the same rule book that they're playing by, which means that we kind of ignore the rules, then that's exactly what we should do. And so I absolutely support the governor of California and any other governor in any other blue state that decides that they want to do this. The red states don't have anywhere else to go. They have already gerrymandered these seats so far that is the reason that the Republicans are currently controlling the House. We know that that's what happened in the state of North Carolina, that decided to somehow give themselves an additional 3 seats. That was the difference in the Democrats controlling the House and stopping this agenda and doing actual oversight of this president right now.
One last question. Speaking of oversight, I spoke with Congressman Robert Garcia, of course, newly elected ranking Democrat on House Oversight. If Democrats flip the House, he said his first investigation would be President Trump and his family. Would that also be first on your list?
I mean, listen, we're going to stand together and we are going to investigate. I don't know what is first, Alex. I mean, I can tell you that there's nothing but a treasure trove of violations of the Constitution, violations of the law in general, and overall just lawlessness and criminality. So whether we're talking about violating the Emoluments Clause and going to foreign governors and shaking them down, whether it's shaking them down for planes or whether it's shaking them down for crypto, or whether it's important to look into what he's done as it relates to these law firms and shaking them down, or as we recently saw, that we just lost Colbert, and whether we need to look into the Paramount deal and whether or not he is just going to continue to shake down various TV agencies to the benefit of muting the voices in violation of the Constitution and the freedom of press, or whether we are going to look into the fact that he wants to open a resort with every foreign government that he can find that will give him personal money. You know, there is no shortage of things to look into, or whether we're talking about overall this little crypto dinner that he decided to have where people knew that they were doing wrong to the extent that they didn't even want their faces revealed when they went to that crypto dinner. There is no shortage of things to investigate, in addition to obviously getting somewhere on the Epstein files and determining what level of culpability he had as it relates to what all was taking place with this child trafficking sex ring. I don't know where I would start, but I could tell you we got a lot to dig through and to make sure that the American people fully understand why the 34-count convicted felon was never qualified to be the president of the United States.
All right, Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, safe travels, my friend, given that I see the Golden Gate Bridge there behind you. Thank you much.